So I'd like to talk a little bit about, the common theme in every meeting and every presentation in every meeting is that one of the major hurdles to deployment is the regulatory or licensing uncertainty. So I wanted to explore that a little further, talk a little bit about where we were during the NGNP days and contrast that to where we are now. And I'm really interested in, with that background, then getting some insights from the group on whether we're on the right path, if it looks like we're making progress in the right areas, and make sure that we're focused on the right topics going forward. So, so I guess I'll start with, and I think Finis made reference to this morning, when EPAC came together in 2005, there was a strategy team that was developed that was half DOE and half NRC. And their purpose was to go off and find a plan that would allow both agencies to be successful in supporting deployment by 2021, which was the EPAC edict for NGNP. And in the licensing area, they put together a licensing strategy. It was resource loaded, had a very detailed discussion of everything that needed to be done. And it came to the conclusion that, there were 4 big hitter policy topics that needed to be addressed, both from a technical and a commission policy standpoint. It was how do you pick, how do you establish the source term, including how you cite this gas reactor? How do you pick the events, including the accidents? What are the allowable doses from those accidents? And how do you deal with some alternative to containment? So those were the big 4. And those were related to the white papers that Finis mentioned. So we started on this work. I joined the lab in July of 2008, so just before this report came out. And we put together our implementation plan for how we would address all of these topics. One of the first things that we did was establish what we referred to as the licensing working group. And the group was made up of the 3 domestic HTGR suppliers at the time, which included Westinghouse/PBMR, General Atomics, and Areva. We also had a representative from Entergy to give us some owner-operator perspectives. And as we developed our proposals and had our dialogue with NRC on these 4 big hitters, all of those team members were involved in either development of our proposals or attending the meetings. So it was a all for one for all sort of an approach. There was a lot of mutual benefit there. We weren't sure what sort of down selection process may occur or which of those designs may move forward. And we also wanted to avoid a situation where we may solve a policy topic and then a different developer would come into NRC the next day with an application with a completely different approach, and everybody would throw up their hands. So we worked pretty hard to have a consolidated approach with consistent messaging to NRC. So we started making these proposals in the very late 2008, early 2009 timeframe. Had lots of good dialogue with the staff for the next 2.5 years or so through around the end of 2011. At the end of 2011, Energy Secretary Chu sent the letter to Congress indicating that the project would not move forward into phase 2, primarily because there had not been a public-private partnership established for the development of the design. But the letter also said, we want to make sure you keep moving forward on critical research and on working with the NRC to develop the regulatory framework. NRC read it a different way. They read it to say, project's canceled, stop working on it. So we spent the first half of 2012 convincing them that we needed to move forward in establishing the regulatory framework or this was never going to get off the ground. They established an updated and focused team, and we agreed on a short list of topics that included these 4 and worked pretty hard to resolve those over the next year or so. These issues were all resolved and presented to the ACRS, as Finis mentioned, in early 2013. Good agreement with the staff. And then when the management team at NRC issued the assessment report, it gave some insight into fuel qualification, source term, and containment, but it completely redacted or avoided these topics of how do you pick the accidents and what are the rules around that, which is the foundation for the whole story for licensing. We pushed back on that pretty hard. There was not a lot of interest from either DOE or industry in pushing at that at the time for a lot of different reasons. I think Dennis shared one from Areva, but there was not much interest in pushing on it. We never got a good answer from NRC management about why they chose to redact these topics, but my guess would be if there was not an application coming to them in the near term, why stick your neck out on a policy topic about whether you need a containment or not, or how you pick the accident? So I think it was just a matter of convenience that this was put on the shelf. Jim's opinion. So back in about that same time frame, as we were sorting out or understanding that we weren't going to get what we asked for or expected, I put together this this slide. So not being lazy, but I am using a 5-year-old slide, so I apologize for that. But what I tried to summarize here is these are kind of 4 major steps along the way in the design and licensing process. At the time, I put some notional costs together for what it takes to achieve each of those areas. About 20 or 30 million in the pre-licensing area to get to the point where you've done enough design to put together a draft SAR and actually start into the formal licensing process in the range of 300 to 400 million. And then, I think Dennis or someone earlier used the number of $1 billion out here. So these are all in the, in the ballpark. And the message from this slide is to get from this pre-licensing stage to this stage is about an order of magnitude jump in funding. So NRC's advanced reactor policy statement says, we want you in moving forward to these non-LWRs to make them simpler, less complex, don't rely on operator action, increase the safety margins, and that's all reflected, again, in their policy statement. And they say in there that, oh, by the way, if you have any issues or problems with our policy or our rules, tell us, and we'll resolve those right away so that we don't hold you up on moving forward with the improvements we want you to achieve. So this top line reflects what the policy says. This line reflects what our experience from NGNP actually was. It was, bring us a rock, we'll tell you if it kind of sort of looks all right. We're not going to give you any conclusions till you go do more stuff. So they just pushed all of the decision points down the road. So we used this to communicate the challenge, but again, there wasn't much appetite for challenging the agency at the time. But that was what our picture looked like in 2013. Agency not really doing business in alignment with the policy. So if we fast forward 3 or 4 years, NRC has been working through challenges from Congress, lots of complaints from the industry, and I think their own interest in making some improvements to the process. They started to draft a implementation action plan that addresses some strategic objectives. They started working on this in 2016, and they published it last year. It has 3 major parts. It's got a near-term section that I'll talk about in a minute. And the near term is, what are the specific actions we need to be working on with industry to be able to support deployments that are in the late 2020s to 2030-ish time frame. So again, this is what are they going to do between now and 2021 to get to that place. That plan is cut up into 6 strategies. 1 and 6 have to do with communications and their internal training, so I won't spend much time on those. But the big hitter issues, including the big 4 that we talked about, show up in their strategy 3, which is review framework, and strategy 5, which are the technical and policy related issues. This is actually NRC's slide, and they've been using it with the ACRS and the commission over the last 6 months or so. And they highlight in yellow the places where they've either resolved an issue or a resolution is pending. The 4 items in yellow are all of the 4 that we started on in NGNP and that have been addressed or have continued to be addressed through the ART program going forward, not only for HTGRs, but all of the advanced reactors. So again, making a lot of progress in these key areas. I'll talk about those in a little more detail in a second. So we use this picture a lot, and it was developed here at INL, and NRC sort of picked up and run with it. But it's a simple way of looking at I guess, both the requirements and the technical inputs needed for licensing. So the way this is structured is a sort of a tree with branches. at the base of the tree, you have to know what the impacts or effects or accidents or external drivers might be on a plant that may cause some upset that causes a release. So this is the key policy topic of how do you decide on what are the accidents. That has an effect on the fuel and its potential release of fission products. Those proceed through a series of boundaries depending on the plant type, result in a source term that gets released over the fence. And the big thing NRC is interested in is, what's coming over the fence and going to the public. That's the whole crux of the biscuit as far as licensing goes. So this is where most of the rules and policy reside, down the trunk of the tree. And then, as you're all aware, all of these various R&D activities and technical development work all support the story that's related to the trunk. So if I go back to those big four that we talked about at the beginning that were in the NGNP licensing strategy, first one was, what are the events and what are the rule sets that go along with the events? We've been engaged with NRC for about 2 years now with an industry-led and technology-inclusive licensing modernization project. It's very similar to the NGNP approach since it was nominally technology-inclusive in the first place, even though it was only being applied to gas reactors. This is being managed for us by Southern Company with a lot of input from other end users and reactor developers from each of the three areas that Rita mentioned. It's covering these four key topics. And we're having working meetings with NRC now about every 6 weeks, in addition to the meetings that Rita mentioned. The plan is for them to get to a place where they can endorse the industry process in a draft reg guide around the end of the calendar year, and then they hope to formalize that before the end of 2019. So that would take this one, and there's very good agreement on, I'd say 90% of the content here. The places that are still loose ends have to do with implementation guidance rather than the underlying concepts here. So I think there's good agreement, and that's on a path to completion. On the topic of containment performance, second item out of the four, had some dialogue with the staff. They've picked up with where we left off in NGNP. They've developed a draft SECI paper that's going to go to the commission in the summer. They've had an ACRS meeting on that as well. And they confirmed in their recent reg guide on design criteria that a functional containment approach is acceptable for an HTGR. So again, I think that will be formalized and finalized for other technology types in addition to HTGRs in the next year or so. Third item, use of mechanistic source term. They confirmed that in the NGNP assessment and reconfirmed it in a paper to the commission in 2016. The one open item that is now being explored is whether the commission would allow a change to the policy of siting away from population centers. So that's largely resolved. And the right sizing of emergency planning, which is another key for the HTGR design, has been undergoing rulemaking for about the last 2 years. That regulation change is expected in about 18 months. So of the four big hitters, they're all nominally resolved and will be formalized in the pretty near term, over the course of the next year or so. The other thing related to policy is how do we decide on the technical requirements and design criteria for various concepts? Again, I made mention of the advanced reactor design criteria that we worked with industry on between 2013 and 2014. NRC just endorsed all of those in a reg guide just last month. This is again, reg guide 1232, and this is the title. It has a specific set of design criteria for modular HTGRs, and a lot of big wins in there for, in addressing this pathway, including the updated fuel design limit that's associated with HTGRs was acknowledged and incorporated in the set. NRC's gone to a much more performance-based approach to on-site and off-site power rather than requiring a specific number of wires, no matter what you do. Emergency core cooling has been eliminated and combined with core heat removal. Again, and as I mentioned, they've accepted that functional alternative to a containment structure. And as we were working through this, we realized or agreed amongst the HTGR community that we needed a couple of new requirements on the reactor building, not from a radionuclide retention standpoint, but in its key function of maintaining the configuration of the heat removal path and being able to release helium through that path if that were needed. So I guess going back to that 2013 picture, what I'd say is we've made a lot of progress in resolving the big hitters that have been around for 30 years or so. I won't make this sound overly easy or overly complete, but I think as we've moved forward, we've gotten NRC more in alignment with what their actual policy is, and I think we've significantly reduced the risk and the unknowns that are out here in the high dollar expensive part of the process. So what's different now from 5 years ago when we were working under NGNP and EPAC? Again, I think there's been a very good and consistent push from Congress and the industry on making the process less onerous and more efficient and more focused. I think the NRC did a very good job in putting its plans together in this IAP, and I think they got good industry input so that they're all clear that they're working on the right thing. There's a very, very good core team of senior level management at NRC now engaged who really want to move these things forward. And another one that I guess I want to highlight is Congress has been starting to provide, starting in 2017, providing an allocation for NRC to do this generic or technology inclusive work off of the fee base. So when we bring these topics to them like LMP, they're essentially doing that, I'll say for free. It's coming out of the, it's coming out of that allocation they get from Congress, but we're not paying them the, whatever the $268 an hour times however many reviewers are in the room to get through these activities. So that's been another very huge benefit, and we understand that they've gotten an allocation of, I think it's $10.1 million for the next year. So we want to keep feeding this machine because it's making very good progress over the last couple of years. So the things that we want to also continue to understand, and we stay in close contact with NEI and the technology working group and the individual developers. But we think that the big hitters going forward are NRC's endorsement of the design rules for high temperature reactors. Continue to sort out this path of TRISO fuel qualification, and we're working on a topical report on that. Again, there's this issue of siting near population centers. I think that tends to be more critical for HTGRs than maybe some of the other designs just because of the process heat application. And I'll tell you that I think the staff is willing and able to move that topic forward, but it's one of those that they're not going to stick their neck out for unless there's a clear need and a lot of interest from industry, just because of the politics that are associated with that. From the preliminary or initial meetings I've seen on this topic, there's been pretty limited participation by industry. So I don't think that that's very high on their list right now because, again, I don't think they want to stick their neck out for something that may be of not significant interest. And so I guess this is the end of my presentation, but I guess I would just leave you with the idea that we've made pretty significant progress on some long-standing issues. We need to make sure that we keep doing the right R&D so that we can technically defend some of the remaining loose ends. And we just need to stay in contact with industry end users to be sure we're continuing to work on the right things with NRC while we have this significant and limited opportunity to make progress while we got the good folks in the room and off the fee base. That's all I have. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim. That has been made on the AGR program that Dave Petty summarized for us this morning. There's a missing piece of that puzzle. And the validation of the mechanistic source term methodology, that's one of those side shoots there, that was formerly depleted from the AGR program when the NGNP design work was canceled. So the question is, how is that final piece of the R&D puzzle going to be funded and completed in a way that supports deployment?
I'm not the right person to answer that question, but I guess the point you raise is the one that I wanted to try to communicate in this discussion. I don't disagree that there's regulatory uncertainty, sometimes significant with gas reactors or with other design types. But sometimes the underlying uncertainty is really with a technical topic like that rather than some issue or topic or argument with the NRC. So I guess I wanted to highlight that. Again, I can't answer your question from a program standpoint, but most licensing uncertainty is tied up in some underlying regulatory issue, underlying technical issue.
Jim? I had a question on the siting near population centers. Obviously, that's relevant for some process heat applications. It's also relevant for replacement of retired coal plants and so on, where the population is expanded near those. But in particular, I wondered, in part of that dialogue, you know, that when we look at some of these large chemical complexes where we might actually put one of these facilities, they already have substantial potential impact on their surrounding population centers, and they have procedures and whatnot in place to deal with that. I wondered, in terms of your discussion with NRC, how much discussion there's been of synergies between those emergency planning activities and policy issues that go along with that.
I guess we haven't had significant dialogue in the current timeline and with the current team on that topic, but back during the NGMP days, we did look at some potential applications of process heat, and those were near very large petrochemical facilities. So to your point, some of the things we were sorting out there were they already have an emergency plan for the nearby community, and in addition, they have a pretty large number of employees on their facility site. So if you put a nuclear station either in the middle of that or next to it, you've got to account both for those chemical plant employees and the surrounding community. And it seemed at the time that there was a pretty workable approach to that, other than working through this policy of putting nuclear plants close to cities. No, but I can hear you. I can repeat your question. So for anybody who couldn't hear, Finis was asking what the holdup is, or why folks are maybe from industry are not getting engaged with that. NRC's only had one or two sort of informational sessions on this so far. They were just in the last 3 or 4 months. They were kind of exploring interest. The Southern team that you mentioned with Amir is really focused on the licensing modernization project, although Southern or other utilities may want to provide some input or insight there. So I think we're going to have another chance or two to take a shot at that. I'm just observing that kind of the initial scratch the surface of the topic didn't garner a lot of support or interest, but again, I think we'll have another chance for that. It may have been because it wasn't widely advertised, or maybe folks were busy working on, it was around the time the DOE FOA proposals were due, so it might have gotten buried in the weeds. So I think it'll be another opportunity, but that's going to need some push from industry before the agency would move ahead.